Good afternoon and welcome to the Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues, a webinar where we are going to take a look at the changing climate for ESG and paving the road to COP28. We're sitting at the doorstep, the early days of 2023, a new year when hopefully many new dawns will be possible, where we'll be able to advance so much of the journey towards net zero, so much of the critical steps that need to be taken in order to make COP28 a COP of action, a COP of implementation. That's certainly the desire of the UAE government and the leadership of Sultan Al Jaber, who was just announced as president designate of COP28. So it's all a new beginning, an exciting time to come together on this webinar and take an outlook, look in that crystal ball about what's possible, be optimistic, inshallah, as they say, that we'll be able to strive forward. A changing climate for ESG. We come out of a year of 2022 when ESG started to make some of the wrong headlines. It was a regular occurrence in the Financial Times, the sort of benchmark for economic news coverage that was not critiquing and reviewing ESG in a new light. And the word greenwashing came to the forefront for the first time. So in that regard, we are looking at all things new related to ESG. It gives me great pleasure to kick off our conversation today with our hosts, Hussam Abdel Al, Senior Director, Origination and Sustainable Finance at the Investment Banking at Mashreq. Welcome, Hussam. It's a pleasure to have you and to have you host us here today. If you would, give us your opening thoughts on the direction of this story.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to attend this very important discussion. Thank you very much for the esteemed panelists that agreed and joined us today. There's a good representation from the business community, social enterprises, consultancy. So I really appreciate your time. This is, like Sean mentioned, this is a very important time. The UAE, I would argue, some might say that this is a kickoff for planning and launching the events for COP28. But I'll argue that the UAE has been working on this now for a little over a year, at least here at Mashreq. Also, we've been pivoting for this now for a while. That required great participation in COP27, where a lot of good initiatives were put on the table. And the direction looks like the UAE will, with the help of our friends and brothers in Egypt, build on all that good momentum and try to translate some of these ideas, agenda points into more tangible agreements. So this is exciting. The atmosphere for ESG is definitely changing in the region. It is fairly new in the last, the developments in the last 18 months to 12 months have been encouraging. It's coming here. Globally, it is a bit different because of what Sean referred to as some pushback from regulators, some pushback from politics, and of course, we should not we should keep in mind the changing direction that the war in Europe had created to this journey, and changed the priorities from sustainability and affordability. Now we have security on the minds of marching and planning how we're gonna go to net zero. So with that, I really welcome you all, and I will turn it to Sean to take us through this very exciting discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Sam, for those opening thoughts. Let's go to Saudi Arabia. Fatih Yilmaz, fellow at the Climate and Sustainability Center at CAPSARC. one of the now leading research centers in the region. And of course, Saudi Arabia are making some transformational leaps forward. But Fatih also comes from a deep background. He's from Turkey, has worked with the Central Bank of Turkey for many years. Of course, Turkey, one of the biggest countries and economies in the Middle East, Mediterranean region. So Fatih, we welcome your opening thoughts on the changing landscape for ESG as we take the road to COP28.
Thank you very much, Sean, and once again, thank you very much for putting this great event together and having me over. Well, obviously, we're in the awakening of a new COP era. We have long ways to go, and then considering the fact that we are in the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement, and started with the Egyptian COP, and now we have new COPs on the road, including the UAE. Well, certainly the action agenda will be the main focus of the upcoming COPs, including the UAE, where policy and climate finance are going to be extremely critical. We are going to have to get more ambitious with our policies and the climate finance agenda to really finance the transition. Let me just feed the discussion with a recent study came out of COPSARC. With researchers in COPSARC, we put together a study recently published with an aim to contribute to the global stocktake exercise under the UNFCCC umbrella, where we basically identify country-level transition investment gaps to keep up with the Paris Agreement goals. Our main results simply show that all the countries are lagging behind, where the investment gaps, where the transition investment gaps are strikingly high in developing countries. So we're talking about, in average, $45 trillion investment per in a year up to 2050 here, where the current investment levels are not even one fourth of this number. So we looked at the potential suspects. Obviously, finance came out the biggest, the most important one. And we checked if the global financial climate finance flows are actually, whether these financial flows are in line with the needs, or where the biggest gaps are. And the results show that unfortunately global climate finance flows are highly skewed towards certain countries or country groups, basically the developed countries. At the current landscape, the developing countries only receive roughly 1/5 of the global funds, despite the fact that these are the places where we need the investment the most. So overall, putting our study and the implementation agenda of the COP28, we certainly need to put much more effort on especially getting more ambitious with the policies to scale up the available resources, as well as getting basically speed up with the climate finance agenda.
That's certainly an important context, really scaling up. So many of these new energies, hydrogen being the forefront of some of our thoughts, the scaling up of these, what have been principally piloted solutions, are yet to really make it to the full commercial opportunity. Let's invite Tatiana Antonelli, founder and managing director of Goombook, to give us her opening thoughts. And Tatiana, I hear ringing in my ears, that obviously listening to Fatih there and the concerns, obviously, of finance. John Kerry, the US climate envoy, was screaming literally over the weekend in Abu Dhabi about the lack of money being put into the energy transition. He said, we're either not trying to do it, or we're trying to do it on the cheap, and the results are just not good enough. In the frustration, you could see it in his face over last weekend in Abu Dhabi. Tatiana, your opening thoughts.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's a very good question also, because when we're talking about funding the transition, we need to look at the oil and gas industry and sectors. This is actually very pertinent to the announcement of His Excellency Jaber being the president of the COP. We've seen around the world a lot of criticism, but I think this is also where we need to understand that it's a great opportunity for oil and gas rich countries to understand how to use these sectors to fund the transition. We cannot think about tomorrow suddenly waking up to having only renewables and clean energy. We need to understand how to transition, and unfortunately or fortunately, countries such as the UAE have the power to do it. They will have the fund, and it will come from the oil and gas industry. So when we somehow criticize the participation of the UAE on hosting the COP or having Al Jaber heading the COP, I think there's been a very good reply from the media, from the local media, to show the importance of bringing to the table this industry, especially from a funding point of view. And this is the biggest problem. We've never achieved agreements on who is going to fund. At COP27, there's been an agreement for a small kind of fund, but again, nobody said, I will pay, or we will put the money. There's no agreement on a number. So this is what we're looking at for the next COP. We need to understand where we are at, what has been done, what needs to be done in the future, what to do for mitigation and adaptation. This is going to be the top priority. And then the big question, who is going to finance all this? This is the most important aspect of this COP, and it would be decisive for this COP to come up with a decision.
Right. I mean, show me the money, as the phrase goes, is really, and I suppose this obviously is a webinar that is, of course, being hosted by a bank, Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues. It's all about the money, really, as to getting that transition, getting that new energy in place, the amount of renewable energy that needs to be deployed for power generation, for the electrification of the overall economy is so important. But I wanted to invite Patrick Altman-Ward, CEO of Dana Gas, to bring his opening comments to the table. Just following up on Tatiana there, Patrick, perhaps you could frame your opening comments addressing that point of expectation on the journey to COP28. Obviously, Dana Gas is a hydrocarbon gas producer. We have COP28 being hosted by a country that is a hydrocarbon producer. What's the opportunity in that? Obviously, UAE is a massive producer of solar energy, nuclear energy, all of the above. Your thoughts on this agenda?
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for the invitation to join this distinguished panel. So I think my first observation is that the much maligned fossil fuel industry still provides 80% of the world's global energy needs. And that energy system has been built over the course of 300 years since the first industrial revolution. We are going to attempt to try and re-engineer that energy system in 30 years. So that's just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge that we face. Now, we need as much renewables as we can possibly have. There's no denying about that. In fact, we're all concerned that there isn't enough investment going into renewable energies. But there is a demand by the consumer of electricity, which is that they want it 24/7, 365. And whatever you do, renewables cannot deliver that. So there has to be a complementary baseload system that can provide the backup that gives that dispatchable energy that everybody desires and demands. And there are different ways of doing that, but clearly gas is an extremely important one. If you combine renewables with coal, you will get a 35% reduction in CO2 because that's the average uptime of renewable systems. If you combine it with gas, you get a 70% reduction in CO2. So it's clearly a very helpful contribution. Is it perfect? No, but there are pathways to take it from 70% to 100% through carbon capture and storage. So
do you think on that point, Patrick, that just the fact that the UAE hosting at this juncture, at this point of trying to, I mean, we went to 2021 with the Glasgow COP, which was very much a energy transition focus. And early we came out of that with the whole sort of emphasis, early the derailing of the existing energy system. And then 2022, for multiple reasons, including the Russia's war in Ukraine, energy security came very much to the forefront, and the idea of all of the above were needed. Now in 23, the March 28, the opportunity to bring these two things together, hosted by an energy producing country that does produce all of the above.
Absolutely, Sean. I mean, for me, the definition of insanity was the decision by the organizers of COP26 to exclude the oil and gas industry from the discussions, an industry that provides currently 80% of the world's energy needs. So how can you have a discussion about how we get from where we are today to where we need to be tomorrow, excluding the people who provide 80% of the energy requirements for today? I mean, it's just not possible. And I think what was great about COP27, and it's going to be even better about COP28, is that finally you have the meeting of these different sectors that have to work together in order to provide the solutions that we need. It's impossible to get to where we need to go by excluding certain technologies, certain industries. We need to all work together, and we need to work together twice as hard as we have been working in the past in order to achieve our climate goals. So I think it's, I was there at the opening speech from Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber. And what I found very encouraging about it was a very inclusive, an appeal for a very inclusive discussion, an inclusive discussion from all the parties. Making the good the enemy of the perfect is not a way to get to where we need to be.
Let's welcome Alvaro Hernandez Guedovius, Principal at Strategy and Middle East. Alvaro, perhaps you can sort of pull it all together as you do with your strategy, and that's what you get paid the big bucks for. But listening to all of the elements and as we go forward to COP28, your thoughts as to the journey ahead.
Thank you, Sean. And sure. So what I think it's there has been definitely a global economic thinking shift in terms of this is not anymore an option, right? So now everybody realizes, from the CEO to the boards of every major global company in the world, that this is a universal challenge. And also people are starting to realize that this is a universal opportunity. If we could talk about the value at stake, only in the Middle East, one of our analysis derives that there's a $2 trillion opportunity in the Middle East for green financing. So now if you talk about banks and corporates and even SMEs, and of course the climate tech ecosystem, now everybody realizes there's not only a value, I mean, the cost of doing nothing is high, but there's not only a value preservation strategy, but there's a value creation strategy that should be embraced by every major corporation in the world. If we talk about 6 key sectors in the GCC, non-oil, such as agriculture, construction, transport, water, and so on, we could find opportunities all across these value chains. For example, the green hydrogen market size is expected to be 300 billion by 2050. So in a nutshell, every major corporation needs to get serious about their commitments, and they not only need to give pledges, but also now what we need for COP28 is specific investment roadmaps on how to tackle these investments, where are the funds coming from, and how will we bridge the gap in this funding.
Well, Hussam, taking up that point, COP27 ended with the announcement of the somewhat historic loss and damage fund that the emerging developing economies have been asking for some time. There wasn't much meat on the bones of that other than the big headline and lots of cheers. We achieved something. But moving forward, taking the momentum of that, obviously Mashreq was heavily present and engaged at COP27. What are some of the tangible progress that can be made in the coming months, do you think, so that COP28 can be an action and implementation COP when it comes to financing, and particularly in things like the loss and damage fund?
Sure. The loss and damage fund is not something that the bank is looking at right now. However, it is a part of the puzzle. When there's a discussion about is there funding for the transition, I want to give people a little comfort. From the private sector, from the banks, there is a lot of liquidity available to fund that. What we're missing is bankable projects. And those bankable projects will come from, number one, technology. The banks are available to scale up tested technology, less so untested ventures. And number two, political will. Politics can play a big role into this. The whole climate change issue is a 2% global GDP investment, you're not throwing money, investment every year. During COVID, politicians were able to divert 20% in 1 year. So if the political priorities is put right, there could be money, and the private sector will be more than happy to finance bankable structures.
I think Hussam, Mashreq is looking to double to 30 billion a year, the funding available into new energy projects, renewable energy projects.
We have facilitated in the last 24 months almost $15 billion worth of sustainable funding.
Right.
Looking to double that by 2030.
Okay. Fatih, so the money is there, technically speaking. I mean, bankable projects, of course, is a very big definition ultimately. And the deeper you go into the emerging universe, the more unbankable things become, just for all sorts of reasons beyond the control even of the project itself. How do we deal with that? What has your research shown at CAPSARC to ensure, to help with the bankability of projects? That's what they're screaming at the likes of John Kerry. Help us make these projects bankable.
Sure. Well, to answer this question, let me just summarize the current climate finance landscape in a few words. I use the words uncertain, highly uncertain, mostly insufficient, and unequally distributed. The current global climate finance landscape. So simply, there are many issues to tackle with in order to, get this working and speaking to the transition needs. Take the example of the current global ESG frameworks or being practiced. Almost every country or country group, like the EU, has their own sort of guidelines and frameworks, and sort of pushing their way of this story. Not really putting together this, common perspectives and working together. So basically, such a diverted approach creates a lot of uncertainties that result in issues like greenwashing, where we don't work together to actually create bankable projects across different country contexts. Similarly, most of the current ESG frameworks don't seem to be technology agnostic, where they should be, in order to keep all the solutions on the table. Where we do understand the importance of renewable energy and electrification, as my colleague has already stated, that we simply cannot electrify everything, and we need interim technologies such as the carbon capture and storage. But if one of our recent studies looked at the, for instance, ESG consideration of the CCUS technologies by the mainstream ESG frameworks. The end result was very interesting. They're neither fully included nor actually precisely excluded. It is somewhat like a like and hate type of thin rope. There is. So these technologies are extremely important for decarbonization of particularly the hard-to-abate sectors, including steel, cement, as well as the oil and gas sectors that are not only there to the countries in the region, but also many other developing countries. Take the example of the so-called the Kuznets curve, which simply says that the developing countries, their economic structures are more carbon intensive. But if you look at the current ESG funds, or the financiers, they are reluctant to finance such projects, where we ended up seeing CCS projects, for instance, at the current state, mostly clustered in developed countries, or mainly basically funded by either the public money or the equity of the firms. So basically, developing countries don't seem to have really access to the technology. After the Glasgow, just one quick note on that, there was a happy and important step of the establishment of the International Sustainability Standard Board, aiming to standardize, consolidate the global ESG frameworks. So hoping to bring this, a globally practicable solution. However, ensuring the inclusiveness and flexibility of this framework will certainly continue to be on the front lines of the discussions, both in the COP, outside the COP, and as far as the COP negotiations concerned, there is a new article 2.1. I just want to throw this as well, aligning the global climate finance flows with the Paris Agreement's priorities. That's extremely important.
I mean, that has been a space where there's been a lot of gap ultimately with the expectations set in COP. With the Paris COP and the standards that were created, particularly the $100 billion fund for developing economies and those economies at the forefront of climate change. That money's never come. The money's got to start landing. But Patrick, I want to come back to you as a CEO of a publicly traded company here in the UAE, and just come back to the ESG and the idea of standards. We've seen in different countries that publicly traded companies who have a variety of obligations in their reporting, that ESG is increasingly part of that reporting obligation. I'm wondering, as a corporate, and I mean, whether you're an energy corporate or any corporate, publicly listed expectations, where do you see that challenge, and what is your corporate doing, and should there be more standardization around ESG? Ultimately, that's my question. That's the progress we need to make.
Absolutely, Sean. And I'm very proud of the fact that, in fact, when Dana Gas was IPO'd in 2005, what would now be seen as ESG principles were some of the founding values that the company had expressed at that time. And we've had a very proud track record of corporate social responsibility investments and commitments to corporate governance and commitments to environmental protection. So it's in our DNA. Now, in terms of
is it in the stock market's DNA? Is it in the capital market authorities' DNA? Is there enough being done to raise the standard? I mean, at the end of the day, UAE is going to be hosting COP28 in a few months. The world's microscope is coming down on us. Are we going to stand the heat?
I think traditionally there wasn't sufficient emphasis placed on it, but I think that certainly ESCA and ADX have woken up to that, and in recently they have imposed more statutory requirements in terms of ESG reporting. We have voluntarily reported our ESG story in our sustainability report since 2017, but the international framework of ESG reporting is extremely confusing. There are multiple different reporting standards. They all require slightly different things. They're all targeted at slightly different outcomes. I think one of the things that was extremely positive to come out of COP27 was the agreement of the International Standards Organization to have a go at pulling together all of these standards and coming up with a single standard that would help companies report. The problem in having different standards is that you can't then compare between one person's reporting and another person's reporting. That then results in some of these claims of greenwashing, which I think is no more nor less than a reflection of the fact that these standards are all different. You can't compare one with the other. There's a 0.61 correlation between ESG scores scored by companies depending on which kind of standards you use. I mean, this is clearly not good enough. We need to have a common reporting standard that we can all report against.
Tatiana, you sit on the Engage Committee under the Dubai Chamber of Commerce umbrella. Could you address some of those, the idea of advancing standards? I'm just thinking about the road to the COP28, how we can take advantage of that to leverage a transformation, not only, walk the walk, talk the talk, but talk the talk and walk the walk, that idea of standards and action.
Absolutely. I think to have the same standards is very, very important. Data is the only thing that will show us where is the impact and if we are doing any progress. So we need to have a way to compare what different companies are doing, and this is important. But also, I think sometimes ESG is kind of disconnected from sustainability and from what companies are really doing from a sustainability point of view. If ESG is just, putting my data there and showing that I have an ESG report and so I look good, that's not enough. I need to have a strategy, a long-term strategy that will support my ESG reporting, because I need to progress. And this is also, I think, a problem that we see today. We're only showing a report, it looks nice, it's on our website, but actually, because there's no data and there's no comparison, we're not able to see what is the strategy of the company. Are they really looking at sustainability? Because ESG doesn't mean sustainability. It's two different things.
Well, it's also so critical for the bottom line, isn't it? The idea that you might just get away with some sort of window dressing on your website will not change the fundamentals for your bottom line. At the end of the day, ESG is a strategy to ensure profitability and sustainability of a business. Alvaro, I wanted to get your thoughts on you've been involved throughout your career, both with the digital transformation of financial institutions, as well as guiding them through this sustainability transformation. I wanted to get your thoughts on the form of finance. What climate finance objectives could COP28 institute to advance in the region? We've seen green bonds come into the Middle East, the first one in 2017. Now we've seen beyond banks raising green bonds. What's the opportunity for more reform and ingenuity, innovation in the financial sector in order to get that capital to those bankable projects?
Sure. So totally. Now the ecosystem in climate tech or in climate investing, I just want to highlight a few points. So the amount we all know has fallen short. But
sorry, say that again. The amount what?
The amount of investment in the climate tech ecosystem and in general has fallen short. And
absolutely. John Kerry said over the weekend it's not even half of what's needed in order to reach net zero, in order to reach the last opportunity, the last moment of opportunity for 1.5 degree change. To grab onto the coattails of that still being possible, funding has to more than double.
Exactly. And then what I want to highlight that at least in the Middle East, the growth is positive and the direction is positive. At PwC, we have an analysis about the growth. And in the last decade, we identified around 6 billion of investment in climate tech. But out of that 6 billion in one decade, only in the last year, we have 1.5 billion of funding in climate tech. That's 25% in only the last year. So that's a huge growth. We can say that in the last few years, in the last 5 years, we have a 600% growth year on year in climate tech investing in the Middle East. So that's a massive growth. And also the direction is correct, because now we have more than 2/3 of that investment in the Middle East have been targeted to sectors that contribute the highest greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not only good growth, but directionally, this is also correct. But as we said, the amount is falling short. So what we need is, of course, more transparency. I think the key is transparency and accountability, something that we need to embrace in this next COP. And also we have some progress in capital markets and carbon markets. We had the recent announcement in KSA of the PIF and Tadawul with the regional voluntary carbon market company. And I think this is critical for the correct investment, because at the end of the day, the investor wants transparency and want a clear framework of green financing.
Hussam, just looking at the sort of the diversification of the available capital or the sources of capital, unfortunately, the region generally has underdeveloped capital markets. What opportunity does this pathway to, I mean, COP28 is only a few months away, but nonetheless, we saw last year ADNOC, for example, privatize or bring a number of its subsidiaries to the public markets. What's the opportunity there for bringing more private investment into the available opportunity for sustainable finance?
Not just bringing private money into those investments, but also bringing the new stakeholder here, the investor that come with questions about ESG, sustainability, and long-term plans. To touch base just a little bit on the innovation of the finance market that is providing to the market, besides the green financing that is very specific to those projects that we're talking about, sustainability and ESG linked is something that is coming to the market with very good volumes. We are seeing companies that you would not expect, like the Albas of the world, like the Noga Holding of the world, the Etihad Airways, tap into these instruments that engage with their lenders and their investors with their sustainability plans, commit themselves to relevant KPIs and ambitious targets. This is all encouraging. This has been developing in the last 4 or 5 years in Europe at a very fast pace, but that's coming to the region in a big way.
I want to give everybody the opportunity as we come to closing comments to have a sense again of the time ahead. Again, it's the first month of the year, of a year in which we're moving towards the UAE hosting COP28, the second COP in the Middle East in 2 years, and one in which comes at a time when as I said in my previous comment, quoting John Kerry again, how critical this moment is, that all of these sort of junctures are interconnecting at this time, a kind of a last window of opportunity to really make some tangible impact, and getting capital to the developing economies, to bankable projects, so that we don't have to turn to coal in, I mean, Germany, never mind other places turning to coal, but getting capital for renewable projects into emerging economies, so critical to sort of move them away from the dependency on more carbon heavy industries. But I want to give everybody's thoughts on what you'd like to see tangibly, what could happen, what advice you think the opportunity presents over the first half of the year before the second half gets deep into sort of the step to COP28. But this coming months, the momentum of coming out of COP27, what opportunities do we have to really make a difference to ensure that COP28 is a great success? So Fatih, I'll kick off with you and I'll come back and end with our host, Hussam.
Sure. Well, it is great to see that there's obviously a growing awareness on the climate agenda globally. These days, in almost every academic, business or policy-oriented meetings, there's always a discussion about the climate change and the climate change agenda, which all this global effort will definitely feed into the COP28 negotiations. I just want to point out a few more notes here under the especially UNFCCC umbrella. Global stocktake exercise, which started with the Glasgow and will be completed in UAE COP28, is extremely important. Where basically both party and non-party observing institutions like us, CAPSARC, can contribute to the assessment of the global agenda towards achieving Paris Agreement. So that's extremely important.
CAPSARC was a critical component in drafting the carbon circular economy strategy, which now underpins pretty much the whole transformation in the kingdom.
Absolutely. So we have, as part of our contribution to the global assessment, we also have put together a circular carbon economy index that's important perhaps to mention here. where we speak to the 64 biggest economies in the world, and trying to provide insights on the circular carbon economy progress and potential of these countries. And definitely we try to feed the discussion in every platform that possible, so we can contribute to the COP28 as well.
That's a very important point. I want to just bring in Tatiana on that. The idea that if you can measure it, you can move it forward. You can grade it. You can calculate its impact, as mentioned earlier. That may be the opportunity tangibly, Tatiana, in the coming months, creating measurable indexes within the context of this ecosystem to compel corporates and other actors to move forward. Your closing thoughts.
Thank you. Definitely, we need that, but I would like to highlight also the type of investments. We've been talking about a lot about investment in this session, and we've been talking a lot about technology. I would like also to see investments in low tech. I would like to see investments in scenarios where I don't have to use resources, more circular economies, the reuse. Unfortunately, what we've seen for the past 2 years is a lot of investment in very high-tech solutions that are not accessible to everyone. And when we look at climate change, we need to think that the whole world needs to, be able to do this transition. So I would like to see more investments in low tech and accessible solutions to, fight climate change.
Like planting of mangroves. We saw some reporting over the weekend of using drones to plant mangroves in remote places. I think that's quite interesting. Patrick, your closing thoughts. And I welcome your thoughts on how these two things can coexist, investing for the transition as well as investing in the hydrocarbons, this balancing act that UAE will be managing this year.
So we have a huge challenge already, as I mentioned, Sean, in terms of achieving net zero by 2050. It's even more of a challenge in the context of the fact that there are 800 million people on the planet who still don't have access to electricity, and they're going to be 2 billion additional passengers on this planet by 2050, which is a terrifying thought, but that's the forecast. And they will all demand and want energy. So it's not that the energy demand is going to go down. The energy demand is going to increase by at least 30% from where we are today by 2050. How do we do that at the same time as we decarbonize? And I think the realization in COP28 that gas and oil are going to be part of that solution for a long time to come. But how do we make it part of that solution in a renewable and sustainable way? I.e., how do we make it part of that solution and at the same time decarbonize? And then finally, I think, what better place, as Dr. Sultan Al Jaber said, that the meeting of the North and South, the meeting of the East and West, Abu Dhabi as the location of COP28 is the place for the voices to be heard and for everybody to participate in trying to find the solutions that we need to get to where we need to go.
Thank you for those closing thoughts. Alvaro, your closing thoughts from strategy and as to how to make the next 6-8 months as tangible for implementation as possible.
Thank you, Sean. Totally agree in the fact that oil and gas needs to be there, needs to have some clear sustainable and transition plans given the weight of the energy supply, of course. And also I want to highlight, you can see already some sustainability strategy from ADNOC, and they're building their carbon capture facilities and so on. So I think that we should have a strong emphasis on that, not only on climate, on the startups and so on. And another thing I want to highlight is now with COP28, UAE has a unique opportunity to lead into this because, number one, the competitive advantage in resources, one of the highest solar photovoltaic output in the world, the sovereign wealth funds, the PIFs and the likes. The diversity of regional economies has always been a priority for the last years.
And they are flush with money right now. They have just had their coffers refilled significantly.
Totally, in a context, global context of economic downturn and energy resilience, now we have the sovereign wealth funds that are in a position to lead the investment. So that, and also the fact that we have capital markets that are well enough mature but could be strengthened, and all these conditions, and the fact that the COP28 is here positions the UAE and the region in a unique leading position to lead this and try to convey these agreements.
Well, let's give the closing comments, the last word to our hosts, Hussam Abdel Al, Senior Director, Origination and Sustainable Finance Investment Banking at Mashreq. Hussam, please.
Thank you very much. Just to answer your question briefly,
please.
Some of the things that we'd like to see developments on, and stated before, standards. The work of ISSB is going to be important. UAE has a unique role here in becoming a model, and they're doing a lot. I know that carbon registry resolution is on the cards. It's a right first step. The amount of investments that the UAE has done and planning to do in the short term is also will create an example of how a responsible partner in this global challenge, the UAE will demonstrate leadership on that front. That is what I'm expecting to see over the next 12 months. And there is a lot of groundwork that has been done to support that. So I'm looking forward to that. For this, I want to thank you very much. It's too short. It's a big discussion. There's a lot of topics here, and there's a lot of other subtopics that we could explore. But I really want to thank you all for taking the time for attending, and for the esteemed hosts for taking the time to provide all their thoughts and ideas. That's been very, very helpful. Thank you. And Sean, for you and the GI team, we really appreciate this very insightful discussion.
Well, I would like to thank everybody. We have about our 50 audience who joined us on this webinar today, the Mashreq Sustainability Dialogues, for a very, very useful discussion on a changing climate for ESG, paving the road to COP28. Of course, this is one small part of a wider narrative. With Mashreq, you will see a lot of very useful intelligence and knowledge posted regularly as part of this project, the idea of the sustainability dialogues and finance, climate finance, and the challenge and opportunity of that is something that we're heavily engaged with, advancing that conversation every week. But I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers, Tatiana Antonelli, of course, for joining us from Abu Dhabi at the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, Fatih Yilmaz joining us from Saudi, Patrick Allman Ward, of course, joining us from Sharjah, as well as Alvaro Gadovius joining us from Strategy And. Thank you all very much for spending some time with us today. Have a great day and a great journey to COP28.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Ma salama.